Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today's guests include Seth Stoughton. He's a professor of law and a professor affiliate of criminology and criminal justice at the Joseph F. Rice School of Law in South Carolina, and Chris Cowan. He is the Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Excellence in Policing and Public Safety Program, or EPPS as we will refer to it, at the Joseph Rice School of Law, South Carolina. Thank you both for joining me and discussing with us this really interesting project.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, absolutely.
And why don't we go ahead and just start with what is EPPS, Excellence and Policing and Public Safety Program? What is it and why did it start?
Oh yeah, the big picture question. EPPS is a program at the law school that was initially designed, created, funded, and is now in operation to help improve public safety outcomes by encouraging and driving the professionalization of policing. We work with public safety leaders a little more broadly than that, but the real focus is on improving the way that police officers and executives serve their communities by giving them access to some of the research, some of the professional development opportunities that really don't exist or don't exist very broadly in policing, and leveraging all of the resources of the university to help translate evidence-based practical information into actual practice on the street.
So that all makes a lot of sense to me, but I'd love for you to bring it down to, what do they say, squad level, right? So what would be an example of a way that you might teach something and something that you might teach to police in your program?
That's a great question. I'm going to kick it over to Chris because I want to emphasize with his background, part of the reason we have him on board. Chris spent a good career at one of the largest police agencies in the state and then was a police chief himself for a while. So he can break it down to squad level even better than I can. What do we do, Chris?
Oh, the exciting thing about our program is that it's extremely unique in many, many ways. I think the best way to describe it is that we are creating an actionable learning environment. We're creating an environment where we bring executives together for the purposes of getting practical knowledge that they can apply, and it's actionable. And the best way to describe it is the actual modules that we're teaching: police leadership and management, co-production and policing, civil rights, collaborative communication, organizational change management. And I get excited about it because this type of training that we're doing, it doesn't exist. There's a lot of great training in the United States. There's a lot of great training in South Carolina, but the uniqueness of our program brings it down to that squad level, to the boots on the ground level, to allow leaders to be able to receive information that's actionable, things that they can take back that are practical to what they do every single day. And the best part about it is the environment that we've created for them to learn in is not your traditional model where you come into the room, they hand you a syllabus and you sit down and you go over a PowerPoint. We don't do that. Our instructors are actually told that we want them to do 7 to 12 minutes roughly of instructional time every hour. And that's it's kind of a target time, but we spend all of our time in group settings and in group interactions, and we'd go over case studies. And it's just really exciting because it's so non-traditional. It's 32 years that I had in my career. I didn't get the opportunity to have this type of training and to have an educational psychologist that's on staff that's helping us develop the curriculum and the learning objectives and making sure that the instructors are teaching such a way that people can receive the information and use the information. It's super exciting.
So one of the things that we might do when we sit down and we design a course, we start with the learning objectives. What are the specific areas of knowledge? What are the specific skills? Or what are the specific attitudes that we want students to be able to walk away with, bring back to their agencies, and put into play? And once we design that, then we begin identifying the evidence base. What are we actually teaching? How do we wed theory and practice? What are the practical exercises that we use? So I'll give you 2 squad level examples, one of which is the very practical skill of how to run an effective meeting. That's something that police executives, and that's our target audience, do every day. They're involved in dozens of meetings a week and maybe even more than that. So how do you make sure that the right people are there? How do you make sure that it doesn't become a purely performative meeting? How do you make sure that it's actually productive? How do you make sure that it doesn't just have to be an email or a phone call or some other method of communication? Now that's at the very, very practical level, but we also do much bigger picture stuff, like talk to students about strategic risk management and how they they should think about making command level decisions on behalf of their entire agency, potentially balancing different options, how to give them a framework for making what are ultimately public policy decisions, the types of public policy decisions that we talk about in law school classrooms. How do you allocate your officers to one part of city versus another? How do you balance the qualifications that you want to have incoming officers have against your need to fill space, right? Your need for bodies. These aren't just practical questions in the sense of taking a test. They are real puzzles that police leaders have to deal with every day. And we don't pretend to provide answers, but we do want to give our students an intentional set of concepts and frameworks and evidence-based research so that they can figure out what answers work for them and their agency and their community.
Well, I think some of those lessons could be used at the higher education level too. Like, how should we run a meeting?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I was talking with our dean, William Hubbard, who is incredibly supportive of the program, and I'm very grateful for.
He's a great dean,
support.
yeah.
He's wonderful. He's been truly, truly wonderful. And I was talking about our full-time on-staff, in-house educational psychologist who helps make sure that we're not just presenting material in the same old way, that we're doing it in a way that's really going to work for professional adult learners and older students and folks who haven't been immersed in an academic environment for the last 10 years or so. And he said, why aren't we doing this in all of our classes? Right?
I knew you were going to say that because I'm sitting there as a dean going, oh my gosh, that's great. That's like instructional design with a huge extra, right? A psychology piece. Wow.
And thinking about the assessments, right? How at the end of a week of class, how do we make sure that our students are walking, or at the end of a day, how are we making sure that our students are walking away with the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that we want them to have picked up?
So you mentioned police executives. Who are they? Who are the people generally who are enrolling in your program, and how do they get to your program? Individually, a police force that sends certain numbers of people? How does this work?
So right now we have 2 experimental cohorts. Before we started opening this up more broadly, we kept it limited to South Carolina, and we had agency executives. And what we meant by that was anyone that the agency considered to be at an executive level or command staff level were eligible to be executive level or command staff level. As you know, there are so many different police agencies, from 3-person agencies to 800-person agencies. We didn't feel like we could just say a rank, right? Well, it has to be a captain, because there are agencies that don't even have that rank, right? So we left it up to the agency to figure out, what do you consider command staff or command staff eligible? We had an application process. We went through with our advisory board and selected our initial 32, 2 different cohorts of 16. And the point there was to really identify people, ideally who were in about year 15 to 18 of their career, so that they still have a decade or so ahead of them where they can take what they're picking up from us and continue to spread it on to their coworkers and their supervisors and their subordinates. I'm going to let Chris talk about the goal for expanding this out, but I will tell you that we joke all the time, the goal is world domination.
Hey, I can get behind that. That's like a good plan.
Well, it's another exciting point for me is that the reach that we have to law enforcement in our state. Seth talked about the number of agencies across the country, and across our state, we have in excess of 300 agencies, police agencies, whether it's state, county, or police, municipal. So we want to try to reach as many people as we possibly can, but we want to make sure that we're effective in making sure that we're impactful to the individuals. We don't want to run a mill where we're running people through. That's not the point. The point is to be giving them practical, actionable information that they can apply. And the only way to do that is to make sure that we're developing relationships with them, that we're providing resources to them, not only from the university, but other resources we have access to outside of the university and outside of the state, to make sure they have the support that they need, that they can pick up the phone and call people like us or anybody and be able to get the help that they need. So we want to make sure that we reach everybody. But the hard part about that is making sure we can reach everybody. But what we're building out is such a solid quality curriculum, learning objectives, and team that we want to make sure that we're impacting small groups at a time. So as Seth said, we've got 2 groups of 16 going through right now. Our goal is to create another cohort starting next summer, where we'll have another group of 16 professionals going through the program. And then we're also doing a lot of what we call one-off trainings, micro trainings, where we're going to be able to provide video content that people can take to squad meetings, and they can can provide 5-8 minute videos that they can review, and they can apply as a supervisor and a manager and as a leader. They can take those videos and they can help build themselves, but they can also help build their squad, their unit, their division, and their agency as a whole. And so we're trying to make sure that we're providing quality training in every section of what we're doing. We've got the master's that's going to start hopefully in August of 2025, the graduate certificate program that will also start in August of 2025. Now, keep in mind that what's unique about our program is police executives and executives that are be going through those master's and the graduate certificate, they will be getting a master's from the School of Law at the University of South Carolina. That's unique to think about, and that's really, really special, and it's really exciting. So then on top of the master's, go ahead.
I just want to pick up on that because ultimately we are a law school, and that means that a large part of what we do is bring law school special competencies to this instruction. And the special competency of a law school is law and policy. Those are the two things that we do, right? Public policy, particular way, and law. So when we're teaching one of these classes, like our collaborative communications class, there is certainly a lot of communication skills that we teach, but also diving into some of the legal aspects of communication that modern executives need to know about. State public records law and FOIA. Who's allowed to speak and make representations on behalf of your agency? What is the relationship that you have as a police executive with your city attorney or your county attorney after a critical incident? How do you think about deferring to them or not deferring to them if, for example, there's some incident and you want to apologize for it, and your attorney is saying, whoa, we got to be really careful with public apologies because that's a liability issue. Those are legal, or at least legal adjacent questions that simply don't factor into existing police training.
I think it's important to expound on that point because we are based at a law school. We're based in a situation, I mean, you think about the police profession where the principles of what we do is enforcing the law. And so it's really seems like a really common sense approach to education and advancing the profession, but it's not something that's been done. And so we believe that we're doing it in an effective and an efficient way, but we're trying to provide levels to that training. So there are prerequisites to getting into a master's and a graduate certificate program. And there are a lot of really effective leaders and executives in policing that don't have an associate's degree and don't have a bachelor's degree. And they're very, very smart and they're very, very good at what they do, but they want to advance their profession. They want to advance themselves personally and professionally. So we want to provide executive credentialing opportunities to be able to provide that additional training and support through the uniqueness of our program. And so we're excited about the different, I call them brackets of what we're doing. We're providing the master's and the grad cert in one bracket, the executive credentialing in another bracket, the micro trainings in another bracket, the research element and support that they can receive from the team to just the one-off trainings. They're calling us now and saying, look, we've got this situation going on within our agency. We would like to get some assistance from a legal standpoint, but more importantly, we'd like to get assistance from an EPPS standpoint. We want to understand how we can progress and how we can continue to advance. We tell people we're excited because we help them go, they're good. Really, the profession, policing as a profession is professional. We want to take them from good to great. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're learning in the process too, which is a lot of fun. Without
shying away from some really hard conversations about problems in policing, the harms that policing has inflicted, intentionally or unintentionally, the costs of policing, the role of policing in a modern democracy. When we teach the civil rights class, we start from the development of modern police agencies in the pre-Reconstruction era and the shift in criminal justice through Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the role of police, because we think, and we've had very, very positive reception from the police leaders who've been through the program so far, you have to know what that history is because your community is still dealing with the aftershocks of that history. We are still building on this historical foundation. And one of the things that's really, really impressed me is the way that our students and the police leaders that we speak to more broadly don't shy away from that. Chris has really led by example in a lot of these classes by saying, look, we need to confront our problems. And that's our personal problems, our individual failures, the things that we struggle with, but also our institutional problems. So we're not just cheerleading We are trying to improve something in, I think, the most holistic way by identifying that it is both important and flawed, and there's room for improvement. That's a message that resonates with thoughtful leaders in, I'm sure, every profession, but particularly policing right now.
Well, I think that's really excellent because I've heard that police officers, agencies, there isn't a tremendous amount of training regarding law, period, right? Applying the law, legal policies, that kind of thing. So you're doing that, but then you're also looking at where they've been, where the profession's been, where the historical pain points have been, so that decisions can be in that context. So really appreciate that perspective. I'm wondering though, I think about this center and I think George Floyd. Was that the impetus for this center? If not, what was the impetus and why did South Carolina invest such a significant sum, which you can share with all of us?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I don't think, for me at least, I've been working on policing issues as an academic since 2012. I don't even want to think about how old that makes me. One of the things that I did after coming to the University of South Carolina in 2014 is begin to make contacts with Chris and with other police leaders in the immediate area and throughout the state to get a sense of how they can support my mission teaching law students. So for my criminal procedure class, for example, I have my law students do ride-alongs so that they have the opportunity to see the Fourth Amendment in operation.
Oh my goodness. I think you're the first law school I've ever heard who has their students do ride-alongs.
It's a tremendous exercise. I started about halfway through the semester when we've talked about the basic Fourth Amendment framework. So that way they have the opportunity to see really how often officers are brushing up against the Fourth Amendment. And it is, of course, all the time. And they also have an opportunity to talk to the officers about what the Fourth Amendment means to them, how they balance those competing interests of social interests and individual interests and privacy and liberty and autonomy. So my interest in building relationships with police around the state and agencies around the state was really intended to be reciprocal. What can you do to advance my mission? And what can I do to advance yours, right? What can I do to make policing better in a way that is collaborative? I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and I have been involved in adversarial reform efforts, but I also think there has to be room for collaborative reform. And in conversations with Chris and others, I think that got a lot of buy-in. So that really started the gears turning. And then it was probably 2018 or 2019 when I started to put pen to paper and develop what would an academic center with a practical focus on collaborative reform and improvement really look like. I would say that the George Floyd incident and some of the incidents before and after helped receptivity within policing. I think there was a little more of a recognition. And at the time, Chris was a police executive. So Chris, I'm curious about your perspective here too. I think there was this recognition that it's not enough to just talk to our folks in-house about how to do things the right way. We need to be a little more public facing about the need to do things the right way. We need to, as a profession, we need to own our improvement a little bit more. And that gave us room to approach the legislature after communicating extensively with our law enforcement and community stakeholders with a proposal to say, this is what we want to do. And maybe not everyone is quite on board with it, but no one is actively against it, right? We have at least gotten the thumbs up, if not the affirmative push forward. And a lot of those thumbs up have turned into affirmative pushes, which has been really gratifying. But Chris, what's your perspective on that?
I would say that it's about stakeholder engagement. And one of the things that we have embedded into the training, but we also have embedded into the principles of what EPPS is doing is stakeholder engagement and understanding what stakeholders want, what they need, what they expect, keeping in mind that the police are one of our stakeholders. And so when we look at, this is not something that Seth just walked in one day, in 2023 in January when this really launched and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is something that was a building process that went back to his ride-alongs, keeping in mind that officers benefited from the ride-alongs just as much as the students benefited because it gave the officers a different perspective, a different filter to see life through. And I think really what that boils down to is all of those incidents that have been mentioned, whether it's George Floyd or whatever, They were impactful for the country and the community, and they were impactful for all of the stakeholders. But what EPPS really boils down to is the foundational belief that police officers have that they want to be better every day. They've always, this goes back to when the first police officer started. They got into the business for a reason. And I have fun because I get to get up in front of these cohorts and I get to tell them, I'm here only because I can tell you all the mistakes that I made in my career that I don't want you to make. I'm not an expert in anything other than making mistakes. And so being transparent and being open, because I want to learn. And I think that police as a whole, even when the discussions were occurring about police reform and defunding the police and all of those different things that occurred, the police were standing up and saying, yes, we want to get better. We want to continue to improve. And I think fundamentally, that's what EPPS is about, is simply being a resource for one of our stakeholders. And stakeholders in this situation are the community. And I believe the community is broken up into multiple different facets. That's the clerical community, the commercial community, the education and academic community, and the residential community. And then we've got our stakeholders that are the police and the sheriffs and the state agencies and the federal agencies. Those are different stakeholders. And so I think we take that into account in what we're teaching and what we're fundamentally doing. But going back to your original question, I think that this boiled down to the fact that Seth had a vision. The law school was smart enough to take that vision and put it together. And we spoke about Dean Hubbard and his vision for what he's trying to do for the world and make the world a better place. And so, we all could follow suit in that and learn from that. And I think that's really what it boils down to and what we're doing fundamentally with the co-production in public safety, what we're doing with the educational process and how we're doing it and the uniqueness of what we're doing. It really boils down to, I think police, at the end of the day, public safety professionals want to be better. And the way that they get better is through education and through advancing the profession. And the only way that you advance the profession is by building, and that's by learning. And I think that's what we're doing.
And particularly taking folks a little out of their comfort zone. One of the things that we're pretty clear about is we're not trying to teach the folks in the room how to police. They do that wrong. I don't want to put my instructors in the position of getting up in front of a room of professionals and saying, you've been doing it wrong. But I do want my instructors to get up in front of the room and say, let's talk about how we can do it better. That can require some comfort with discomfort, right? In that way, it is really no different than law school. In order to make effective learning happen, we have to take our students outside of their comfort zone and introduce new concepts, new ideas, new skills, and then they have to struggle with them until they don't have to struggle with them anymore.
Let me give you an example. So we take the Scorpion unit, the Memphis situation that occurred that we all know is just not a good situation. And we don't bring that in and point fingers at Memphis. And we say, okay, look, you have a situation where you have a mayor, you have a city manager, and they both don't agree of whether Scorpion unit should continue. The mayor's telling you that you have to keep the Scorpion unit. Your city manager saying that they don't want it, but you're going to have to make it work because the mayor's the decision maker. And so we put them in a scenario where we use the principles of what we've been teaching in police leadership and management, organizational change management, communication, collaborative communications. And we take all the principles by what we've learned to that point, and we ask them in a small group setting, we want you to recreate whatever you think it needs to look like, but you can't get rid of it. And they have to apply the principles, and then they have to present that to a panel. And on that panel is their mayor, their city manager, somebody from the media, somebody from the clerical community, somebody from the civilian advocacy. And again, that's an example, I think, of what Seth is saying is where it's a really tough situation because cops don't like to point the finger at other cops and say that nor at themselves. And we don't want to do that. That's not what we're in the business of doing. We're simply trying to take the principles and apply them so that they can use them to improve themselves and improve the department. And again, as I said earlier, the great part about it is we're learning from them as we're teaching because they're bringing things to the forefront that I don't think we would have thought of. And they're really creating this really great working learning environment that's a lot of fun. It's exciting, but it's emotional. There are some tears that are shed. There's some frustration that is shared between them. They don't agree with us. We don't agree with them. They don't agree with each other. But through emotion and adversity comes success and significance, in my opinion.
There's also a heavy emphasis in a number of our classes, systems design and systems building, because we are not teaching line officers. We are teaching people who have power and authority in their agencies. Some of them are police chiefs. Some of them run their agencies. Some of them are higher level commanders. Some of them are mid-level commanders. But These are folks, in fact, the last class that we had, 3 of our cohort members are in various processes to be considered for chief's positions in different places. So we don't just want them to think about officers as individuals. We want them to think about agencies as something that have to be intentionally designed to get the best outcome. And that includes your relationship with your community, how much, I'm very hesitant to use the phrase community policing because it's so squishy, but how much real meaningful community engagement there is, how much feedback there is. That's a design issue. What your communications with your community look like, that's a design issue. How you select your officers, how you promote your officers, what you reward officers for, that's a design issue. How you create incentives and disincentives for behavior, that's a design issue. And what we try to push is not making decisions by default, but realizing that a lot of the stuff that our police executives do every day involve decisions and choices. And they're not always aware when they involve decisions and choices, but if we can make them aware, if we can make that intentional, then we're elevating the decision making. And there's plenty of good social science on being intentional about decision making, and explaining your decision making leads to better outcomes and better decisions. So just bringing that degree of intentionality, not just doing the job of a police executive, but thoughtfully performing the job of a police executive.
Well, this is really an extraordinary program. When you hear the cries, defund the police, it's nonsensical, right? But investing, as the South Carolina legislature did, in this program for improvement among the systems and those who are, in the front line in the police departments and law enforcement agencies makes so much more sense. So I'm delighted that South Carolina agrees with you, and you have been so successful in standing up this program. The Masters in Public Safety Executive Leadership, that is exciting. You said August 25, that will start. And then the certificate program, really exceptional. You are moving forward with the Excellence in Policing and Public Safety program, EPPS program at the University of South Carolina, Joseph F. Rice School of Law. Just want to make sure everybody knows about it so that they can get in touch and learn more about it. Before we conclude, though, I'd like to ask both of you to opine on what you think the future of legal education is going to be in the coming decade. And maybe we can start with Seth.
Sure. I think the core of legal education in law schools is going to remain JD programs, but I think the emphasis is going to shift because I think it has to shift. Our society, our laws are too complicated to just rely on legal education being delivered to future lawyers for future lawyers. So I think we're going to continue to see expansion in other non-JD, either graduate certificate or graduate program areas on issues for non-lawyers who have to work with law, HR compliance, environmental compliance, healthcare compliance, and with what we're doing, policing.
Chris?
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think that one of the things that I've seen the School of Law, the university, Dean Hubbard has really got this vision for the future. And I think the exciting thing that I think trying to set the groundwork and trying to set the pace. And I do agree that I think the core will change, but I do believe that there will be an expansion. I do think there'll be a shift. The world is changing, but the world is changing, in my opinion, in a way that it's becoming smaller. What's going on other continents and other corners of the world is now affecting everything we do in South Carolina, whether that's economic, socioeconomic, whatever it is. And so I think the vision has to be looking to expand, but I think the base is going to stay the same. The core values will stay the same, but we will continue to expand. And I think USC is on the tip of the spear on that. And I think that's what we're doing with the EPPS program. I think that's what we're doing with other master's programs that are being developed.
Well, thank you both for what you're doing in educating law enforcement officers. I look forward to the world domination, where that will be available for all law enforcement officers, even those here in Texas. And if you'd like to listen to additional thought leaders talk about their views of legal education and what's going on at their law school, I hope you will check out additional episodes on the Aspen Leading Edge podcast webpage or on your other podcast favorite channels. Thank you so much, Professor Stoughton and Director Cowan.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.